Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Scares That Shaped Us, a podcast about horror writers and the stories that made them. I'm your host, Matthew Jackson, and to quote John Mulaney, I am damp all the time. Summer is here in Central Texas. It is soupy and swampy and yucky outside, and it's hard for a big guy like me to cool down, but we press on because there is still a reason to get excited about summer, and that's horror books. This week over at Paste Magazine, my list of the 20 most anticipated horror books of the summer between now and the end of August went up. It is full of amazing stuff. We get new books over the next 3 months. We get new books from Stephen Graham Jones, Paul Tremblay, Haley Piper, John Langan, Sylvia Moreno Garcia, Gretchen Felker Martin, to name just a few. It was really hard to get this down to just 20 books. I could have kept going on and on and on. But if you want a starting point for the horror books that you should be looking out for this summer, pastemagazine.com, tab over to the books section. You will find my list, and it's going to be a great time. There's going to be a lot of cool reading, and I hope that some of those fine people will be on this show in the next few months. I've already reached out to some of them. I'm not going to tell you who yet, but clear some space on those shelves, everybody. I also wanted to briefly mention a film I saw this past week. It is called Dangerous Animals. It is the third feature film from the writer-director Sean Byrne, who made The Loved Ones and The Devil's Candy. Sean Byrne takes a while between films. It's been quite a while since The Devil's Candy came out, and there was an even longer wait between The Loved Ones and The Devil's Candy. It's always worth the wait. He always delivers incredible stuff. Dangerous Animals is about a young woman who is a kind of itinerant surfer. She kind of drifts around Australia surfing and avoiding close emotional connections with people for her own reasons. And she runs into a serial killer played by Jai Courtney, who has a very interesting modus operandi in terms of how he deals with his victims. And it has to do with the sharks that he knows how to bait from his Shark Tour boat. It is an absolute blast. Sean Byrne has this way of playing with violence. He reminds me of Jeremy Saulnier, who does it with crime films, who also directed an amazing horror movie called Green Room, by the way. If you haven't seen Green Room will knock you on your ass. But Sean Byrne has a way of messing with violence where you sort of can't believe what you're seeing, even when you are an hour plus immersed into the premise of this whole thing. He just has this visceral quality to the way that he stages all of that stuff. Jai Courtney is fantastic in it. He steals every scene that he's in. I hope he gets a lot more cool villain role offers after this. It is in theaters right now. Again, it's called Dangerous Animals. If you love sharksploitation movies, if you love animal attack horror movies, if you just want to watch an unconventional serial killer film, check it out. I loved it a lot. We've got a great show for you this week. Our guest is Josh Rountree, a fellow Texan who is the author of an amazing book that's also coming out this summer called The Unkillable Frank Lightning. We're going to talk to Josh about that, and we are going to dig deep into one of those stories that I always knew would be on this show eventually, 1974's The Texas Chain Saw Massacre. Like I said, Josh is a Texan. I am a Texan. We both live in the relative geographic area where the Texas Chain Saw Massacre was shot. So we get a lot into kind of our childhood legends about this film and what it was like hearing about it for years and then finally seeing it. It's a lot of fun. So let's head over right now to our interview with Josh Rountree. Joining us this week on The Scares That Shaped Us is the celebrated author of story collections like Fantastic Americana and Death Aesthetic, and the novella The Legend of Charlie Fish. His latest book, The Unkillable Frank Lightning, is coming July 15th. Josh Rountree, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. We met at the Ghoulish Book Fest in San Antonio earlier this year. We were on a panel together, as with a lot of people I met at that event, I made a note of like I got to go home and read some of their stuff because I haven't read any of Josh's stuff, and it just so happened that my editor at Bookpage said, "Do you wanna look at this one?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I just met that guy. Sure, let me
Perfect
give it a
timing.
let me give it a crack." And I read it in one sitting. It hooked me from the first moment, and I felt so comfortable and happy in the space that you created with that book that I didn't want it to end. So, for anyone who might not know yet what's coming on July 15th, can you give us a little teaser of what Unkillable Frank Lightning is?
Yeah, for sure. So basically, my shorthand pitch for this was always Frankenstein in a Wild West show. But really, what it amounts to is it's the narrator is a woman named Catherine Colbridge, and she is a doctor in the 1870s, but also an initiated occultist. And when she loses her husband, Frank, in her grief, she basically uses those two talents to bring him back to life. And as typically happens in this sort of thing, it doesn't go well, right? So things go awry, and she spends a few decades kind of torturing herself about it. And as the story begins, she's decided to make things right. So it starts out with her basically having tracked him down after all these years, hired a couple of killers, and they're on their way to put him back in the grave. And when she gets there, she finds that maybe he's not the same monster that she recalls him being from those many years ago.
Yeah, it's Frankenstein in a Wild West show is a great hook for someone like me to begin with, but like if you're hearing this, listeners, and you think you understand what's going to happen in this story, I promise you don't. Josh evolves this thing in a really interesting way. Um I wanted to ask about the origins of this because Frankenstein in the Wild West show, great elevator pitch, right? But Catherine herself is such a compelling individual in a sort of hell of her own making a little bit when we meet her. Where did the book start for you? Did it start with her? Did it start with Frank? How did you first come to this?
So it started with Frank, and but she became obviously the focus really quickly. Really, the way this book came about is I have for a while now just been working on. I do a lot of short story writing, and so I've written a number of short stories where I was playing with the concept of uh, just monsters in old Texas, and it's kind of a period that I defined as is roughly 1830 to 1930 type of range, and just wanted to have some fun and write some monster stories in those settings. And out of that grew my last book, The Legend of Charlie Fish. And what that one was essentially was Creature from the Black Lagoon set during the Galveston hurricane of 1900. That was my kind of shorthand pitch for that one. And I had so much fun with it, and I kind of wanted to play more in that world that, the idea came that, well, what other universal monster can I play with and see if I can, um, make that one interesting as well. And so it really started with me wanting to do the Frankenstein thing, not just from the book influence, but from the film influence side of it, and see what I could do with it. And I needed a Dr. Frankenstein character, and that is where Catherine came in. She's my, mad scientist, I guess, in this one. But since there was so much magic in the first book, I didn't just want this to be some sort of scientific way she was bringing him back to life. So I wanted to sort of root it in a little bit of black magic. And that's where kind of those two sides of her personality kind of came together for me. And once I figured out, okay, this is her. This is where she's from. This is a woman in that time. Obviously, being a doctor is she's an outlier at that point. So she has a lot of hills she's climbing anyway. And then, faced with kind of some of these decisions, she starts to make some bad decisions, and the rest of it is sort of where that sort of roller coaster is away from her after that.
I'm very much looking forward to the third book in this cycle about the mummy buried somewhere beneath the Alamo now.
I definitely hope to do some more of these someday. It's not being written at this time, but I've got my ideas warming up. So
So one thing that I like, we are both Texans, and if you grew up in Texas, you are inundated with the history of Texas. Like it is
hmm
taught in schools to the point that like people from other states that I've spoken to, they don't know like anything about how their state was founded. And I was like, wait, you didn't have to do like Indiana history in
all of seventh grade is like
all of
Texas. Yeah.
yeah, first and fourth and seventh grade, you didn't hear the story of how Indiana was founded, and they're like, no. I'm like, well, it's drilled into our heads. Um, with that in mind, how much research do you do on these things? Is it something that you've sort of passively accumulated over time? Do you dig deep into this stuff for each book? How does it work for you?
I mean, exactly what you're saying. It's just internalized. Like, obviously, being a lifelong Texan, I always forget I'm like a sixth or seventh generation. I had ancestors who fought at the Battle of San Jacinto, so it's kind
Mm.
of burned into me at this point. I've certainly read a lot of Texas history over the years, in addition to what we all learned at school, and so you can kind of get uh, maybe a little bit more truth about that history than what we were all taught as well. But it's history in general is fascinating to me, so I rarely find myself going, "Hey, I need to go research this for a book." Usually, I'm reading something, and that will kind of spark an idea, and it sort of moves that direction. Definitely, I went back and brushed up on some of my uh, just just information about Wild West shows and kind of their place in society at that time, and some of that just to get it fresh in my head. But mostly the Texas stuff, just I would just kind of look up little details if I needed to add something in that I couldn't remember. But it really just lives here.
I want to talk a little bit about westerns while we're doing this, because it's a horror story inspired by Frankenstein, but it is also very much a western,
Mhm.
uh, with a lot of the hallmarks of that genre in it too. And I'm a little bit of a western nerd, as well as a because again, like I grew up like my grandfather loved John Wayne, just like every Texan's grandfather loved John Wayne. So I've had that in me for quite a while. What are your sort of Western fiction touchstones that you go back to that kind of inform the kind of Westerns you write, do you think?
Yeah, I'm a total Western nerd too. Like I've loved them since I was a kid. I obviously love horror. I would say I read, Western more than almost anything. I mean, it's
Hmm.
definitely my favorite. But when I was a kid, it started with the Louis L'Amour paperbacks. I mean, I read, um, I mean, however many had been written by the time I turned 12, I think I'd read them all because my granddaddy had just stacks of them. And so he would finish one and there are 150 pages and he would hand me another one. And so that, I definitely grew up reading those and, moved on to Elmore Leonard and just a ton of other people who were doing that. My favorite, for sure, and my favorite book of all time is Lonesome Dove. I'm a
Hmm.
huge McMurtry fan. All of his stuff I adore, but Lonesome Dove is, I mean, it's the greatest book ever written about Texas, bar none, in my opinion. So that's kind of my pinnacle that I strive for. I think that True Grit is also a book that really inspires what I do, not just for the story, but for the voice.
Hmm.
Especially when I was doing Legend of Charlie Fish, I was consciously trying to do a similar type voice to that one. And Charlie Fish, part of it is narrated by a 12-year-old girl, so that sort of locks in with that book and kind of what it's saying too. But yeah, those are definitely probably my two favorite westerns. But there's many after that. I mean, it just I love them all.
What about movies? What's your like Western comfort watch that you throw on?
Gosh, okay. It's uh man, there's The Unforgiven is certainly like one of the best all time. Of course I'm going to say The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I love all of those, but that's certainly my favorite of that trilogy. Uh the gosh, The Searchers. is
Yeah.
a big. You talked about John Wayne. I mean that that's certainly maybe the most iconic Western that you can name. But um, the uh, the Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. I mean, it's one of
Hmm.
those we could go on forever. I just there's a lot of good
Yeah,
ones. I
yeah,
would say
yeah,
probably
yeah.
The Searchers and The Unforgiven are probably my favorites.
Yeah, it's interesting like with Wayne Westerns, uh like everyone has their personal like pinnacle Wayne Western, and like The Searchers is sort of the consensus pick for the best one. I am I have always been more of a Rio Bravo guy just because
Yeah,
I love Dean Martin, and
it's such a better movie.
I love Howard Hawks in general, just everything that Howard Hawks was able to do in his career, and his westerns are wonderful. Red River is also a great John Wayne Howard Hawks western. I love El Dorado too, which is basically Rio Bravo with some characters flipped around and Robert Mitchum instead of Dean Martin. Anyway,
The
we've been
Shootist also, I would say.
oh, The Shootist is great. It's John Wayne's final
I think it's
film.
his final, yeah. And the book, Glenn Swarthout, I think is how his name's pronounced,
Hmm.
wrote that book. It's a really excellent book also. And same author wrote a book called The Homesman,
Mm.
which they made a pretty excellent movie. It was a Tommy Lee Jones directed movie some years back. The adaptation of that one that was pretty good with Hilary Swank.
Awesome. I'll have to check that out. San Saba, Texas's own Tommy Lee Jones.
There you go.
Um, so we've talked a lot about Texas. We're going to talk more about Texas because we have reached one of those topics for this show that was probably inevitable, but I'm so excited that we got to it and that a fellow Texan picked it. We're going to talk about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre
Heck
from
yes.
1974, directed and co-written by Tobe Hooper. The origins of a franchise, also one of the great independent horror movies, one of the essential Texas movies. It's incredible. I watched it again last night. Before we get into like the meat of it, though, I just want to ask you, Josh, what was your first experience with Texas Chainsaw Massacre?
It's so Texas Chainsaw Massacre came out the year after I was born. I feel like it has always been with me. I remember it as a really young child, and obviously I wasn't there to go see it in the movie. Nobody took me to the theater, sadly, to see Texas Chainsaw Massacre when I was a baby, but um, it was just in the zeitgeist at the time, to the point where by the time I was in elementary school, everybody my age knew about that movie. None of us had seen it, but everybody had, a cousin or an older sibling or something who had seen it at the drive-in, and sort of those stories had trickled down, and we knew, uh, that there was a chainsaw killer who wore a mask of human flesh, and we were super into it, and we would play air chainsaw, battles on the playground. I mean, it just became part of the folklore of Texas at that time. I think, especially, you know, true because we all believed it was real. Before I ever even saw this movie, ever, I was 100% convinced that it really happened. There's
Yep.
that thing at the beginning that says, the film you're about to see is an account of a tragedy that happened to five youths. And um, of course, it's just trying to, give some extra color to the movie, but we were 100% it was real. We would argue, well, no, it happened out by Fort Worth. No, 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 no. It was somewhere over in Austin. And we were fully convinced it was real. And then when I finally saw it, I don't remember the first time I watched it, but I'm certain it was, one of the, hey, it's Saturday night, we're going to rent a VHS player and some tapes and go, see what we can see. And I think by the time I actually saw Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I had seen, various Friday the 13th movies and a lot of the early slasher stuff. So it was probably the mid 80s before I actually saw this movie when I was, maybe 12 or something. But it did not let me down, and it has lived in my head ever since. And if I'm not giving it a lot of thought, part of me still thinks it really happened. I mean, I know it didn't, but it's still that's how it still exists in my brain.
Yeah, if you, I think this is true for a lot of kids in a lot of places since that movie came out. But if you grew up in Texas in the years after, like I was born in '86, and it was always in the conversation in elementary school. There was always, like you said, someone had seen it or knew someone who'd seen it, or their dad rented it and they snuck in and saw a little bit of it, or whatever. It was just always floating around, to the point that my dad, I've talked about this on the show a lot. I was not allowed to watch horror as a kid, but my dad would use the Texas Chainsaw Massacre as like a way to warn me against horror movies. Like he would bring it up as like, it's no, it's so bad. It's just so, you don't want to watch stuff like that. That stuff is just evil. It's just awful. And I mean, he wasn't wrong, but we'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, it was like I always heard that the barbecue joint, the gas station was in LaGrange. That was what people would say. It was, oh, it was in LaGrange, and I knew people who ate there when they were putting humans in the sausage. I knew people who, and
Exactly.
it was always you. People would always talk about like, no, I drove by that gas station one time, which the gas station is a real place. Like that's the funniest part of that, is everyone was like, I ate the human meat at the gas station. Like the gas station's real. It's in Bastrop. You can
I
still
went
go.
there for the first time recently. I had never been, and I live an hour-ish from there. And we were running around doing some errands, and we ran out that way. And I have to tell you, it's pretty funny when you're driving down the road and your GPS says, arriving at your destination in 800 feet, Texas Chainsaw Massacre film site.
Yep.
It's so absurd going out there.
It's yeah, it's there. You can go get some barbecue and get Texas Chainsaw t-shirts and whatever else you want to do out there. But that the funniest thing was the number of people who swore that they knew where the real gas station that served human flesh was.
Yep.
um like I had a whole conversation in a high school classroom one day. Like the lesson plan was gone and the teacher was telling us what he knew about the real Texas Chainsaw Massacre. um and of course, like it's inspired by Ed Gein a little bit,
Yeah.
the murders that Ed Gein committed in Wisconsin in the 1950s, but it's very much a fictional story. Like there was no real Leatherface, no matter what people tell you. But I think that growing up with that just in the lore, just everywhere as a kid in Texas, added this layer of infamy to it, which it already has infamy because of what's in the film. But the way that it was always, like you said, it's always with you. If you're a kid in Texas who's curious about horror movies at all, it's floating around somewhere in your brain from the moment you can start remembering what movies are, which is pretty incredible given that it's been, 51 years now since it came out. Um, and I don't know about you, but the more that, so we talked about the way it was built up in our minds. Um, I'm curious how it hit you, because for me, like Patton Oswalt does the joke about the greatest movie title of all time is Texas Chainsaw Massacre, because every time you hear it, you see a free movie in your head. Uh, I feel that way, but when I first saw it, it was not the movie that I expected it to be based on what people had told me. What was your experience with how it hit you?
Yeah, I think I like it better as the older I get. The first time I watched it, definitely, it could never have reached, the horrifying heights that I had imagined it to be. It's not a super bloody movie. Relative to a lot of stuff I was watching by the mid 80s, um, there's very little blood, but it's insanely intense. And so I think when I first saw it when I was a kid, I was probably looking for, oh, I'm going to see people getting their heads chopped off, and this is going to be, the crazy, wildest thing I've ever seen. And in that respect, it wasn't. But, as that movie starts to grow with you over the years, I think it just gets more and more disturbing the older you get. It's designed to make you uncomfortable in every aspect. I mean, just the film quality, the soundtrack. I mean, there's always something like buzzing in the background throughout that whole movie, whether it's the generator or, not even the chainsaw so much, but just there's insect sounds and animal sounds. Like the whole soundtrack is just really off-putting. And from straight out of the gate, it is just really trying to unsettle you. You've got the flashbulb photos, basically lighting up bits of corpses as it sort of starts to transition to the story. And that entire like first 5 minutes, you have the radio broadcast under there uh, telling, that it starts out just to kind of tell you about I guess to set the scene and sort of tell you about um, the happenings in this graveyard and somebody robbed this graveyard and all this. But then it continues and it spends like 5 minutes low in the background and it's nothing but atrocity after atrocity after atrocity. And that have nothing to do with the story, but it's basically just saying, hey, this world is really screwed up, and we're all going to have to deal with this. It's just it unsettles you out of the gate, and it just never lets up.
I'm so glad you brought up the radio broadcast because it is um it like you said, it's a movie designed to constantly have you on your back foot, like never quite comfortable with what's about to happen. And the radio broadcast, I mean, yeah, they tell the story about the grave robbing at this cemetery, which is where the story picks up. But they talk about oil fields burning at the Texas Louisiana border. They talk about like violence erupting in like in California. There's
Buildings
all this
collapsing.
buildings collapsing. It's this whole thing of like it's that classic like 1970s America on the brink thing where like it feels like the world is falling apart. And what I was most struck by, like I watched this movie I watched it again last night, but I did it differently. Like for the first time because my kid was asleep and I didn't want to wake him up with screaming and chainsaws. So I watched it with headphones on. And I knew this movie had amazing sound design. It's baked in. It's something we've talked about for 50 years. I have never been as unsettled by it as I was watching it with headphones on because you hear every grunt, every like what you might not know, listeners, if you've like thrown this movie on DVD at home or streamed it or whatever and just watched it on your from your couch. In those opening moments when you're getting the flash bulbs and the little snippets, you see a rotting hand, you see a rotting face, you see this. At some point in there, the sound mix cuts to what sounds like human flesh being ripped and sawed and bones being broken, and it's because the hitchhiker character, and we're spoiling Texas Chainsaw for y'all. It's 50 years old. Get over it. The hitchhiker character, who's a member of this family of cannibals, is arranging his tableau of body parts that's going to be on top of the grave marker in the opening shot. Uh, and you can hear him do it, and it's just so it is. I mean this in the most complimentary way, but from the opening sounds to the score to the sheer intensity and strangeness of it all, it's a fucking evil movie. And I mean that in the best way possible, but it is just malignant. It really feels like something that you're not supposed to be seeing.
And that's the thing. It's got that, exploitation type feel. Like,
Hmm.
this is it very much is one of those things like, oh, this is the one that, somebody dubbed off this, VHS tape that nobody was supposed to have, but look at this and and I can't believe we're actually watching this kind of thing. I mean, that's how it's designed to look and feel. And it just that sound design, like you said, just puts it over the top. And you've got him taking those those photographs, and then moments later, he's in the you're in that really claustrophobic van scene where they bring the hitchhiker into the van, and they're quickly learning that that's a bad idea, and then he pulls out his camera, and you just kind of make that connection. You're like, oh, this is not good.
Yeah, it's so the more I watch it, the more I appreciate how tight it is structurally.
Mhm.
Because like when I think I was probably 16 or so when I first saw it, and you don't necessarily make all the connections right away. Like your brain isn't keeping up with just how well designed this world is. And the hitchhiker with the camera, it might take you a little longer to realize, oh, it's the
Yeah, I
same
didn't catch
camera.
that the first time. Yeah, for sure.
And then he has that razor blade, and he has that straight razor, and you're like, what's he been doing with that straight razor? Because of what we heard in the first few seconds of the movie. And then you get when they finally get to the family's house, Kirk, I think the character is, the he looks under that netting and sees all of these vehicles. And if you're not really paying attention, or you're not as experienced with chasing narrative early on, you might look at that and go, huh, okay, they're rednecks, they have a bunch of old cars out back.
Yeah.
Like I grew up with 50 different people who had that. But then you realize, like, oh, these are all the people that they've already killed.
Yeah.
Like that's why they're hidden with all
That's
this
where the band's going to end up
camouflage.
next.
Yeah, that's where the van's gonna go, because that's where all these Volkswagen Beetles and old trucks and all the other stuff have ended up. And you just keep making more and more and more connections like that. And I didn't ever think about this before, but like I read a piece by Phil Nobile Jr. from Fangoria talking about how, because the way that these five youths discover the family is their van is low on gas. They stop in at the old falling down house of Sally and Franklin's grandfather, uh, and they just sort of explore an old house, which I grew up in the country in Texas. That's a thing that we all used to do. You
Yep.
go to the old house and look around, and they wander toward the family compound, where Leatherface is waiting. And Phil pointed out very astutely, like, this basically means that their grandparents live next door to these people
Yeah.
forever. They're next door neighbors, which makes it so much more creepy. And I think my larger point here is just it is all designed to create a sense that this was inevitable. That once they entered this county, which is called Muerto County, by the
Puerto
way,
County. Yeah.
Death
I noticed that.
Death County, Death County. Welcome to Death County, Texas. Um, the moment they entered this county, they were just doomed to this fate. Like somehow, like they were almost summoned there by the tableau of the corpses. And they were summoned there because that was the whole thing, was the grave robbing and the desecrating of corpses was bringing in people from outside the area to check on the graves of their loved ones and see if everything was okay. It's just so well put together.
Well, and your point about them having lived next door, there's that line early in the movie where there's that drunk in the guy's just passed out drunk in the graveyard, and he's
Mm-hmm.
just ranting about there's things happen here that people don't tell about, kind of making it known that some people know. He goes, even those that know don't say, or something like that. I don't remember the exact line, but he's implying that this is that it's not entirely unknown who's doing this and who these people are. And you're thinking, okay, well then if they're living next door to them, is this something that they had a hint of, or or that's kind of a horrifying connection to make.
It is, and it's made more horrifying, again, going back to the radio broadcast, if you listen carefully, because there are two different stretches of the movie, at the very beginning and then near the middle, where they have just like the news radio on. And both times the newsreader makes a point of saying that the local sheriff in this county has said this is an outside element. This is a jewel thieving ring from California or something
It's
like
going in
that.
another direction.
And they're just robbing these graves to steal jewelry, and it's not anyone you know, and we're gonna get to the bottom of this. Don't worry about it. And so you realize like, oh shit, the sheriff knows these people too. The sheriff is somehow deflecting, which is all stuff that Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2, which is a different beast altogether, kind of gets into a little more.
Yeah.
But it is it's so it's all so claustrophobic because it just feels like from the moment they drive up to that cemetery, the hands are slowly closing around their throats. And it's a movie too, like I didn't realize, I guess I realized it before, but it hit me harder this time how folk horror heavy it is with I mean, obviously all the bone art points to that, but like even when you look at like they're reading the hippie chick is reading the astrology book
There's
and
so
trying
much
to,
about Saturn in retrograde, and
yeah, it's so like it really does feel like this is some sort of almost ritual sacrifice playing out before our eyes, and I just can't get over how cool that is.
well, there's
um
this whole element too that just builds that direction, and it's one of the things that contributes to making this just so off-putting is there's this constant juxtaposition of human and cattle.
mm,
Like they're this, but basically sort of trying to make the point that they're the same thing. And it starts early and it carries on throughout the whole movie. You know, they're when the hitchhiker is in the van and they're talking about the slaughterhouse, he's talking about, oh, you know, we used to do it this way with the sledge. The sledge is better. And Franklin is really excited about the slaughterhouse. He's like, "Oh yeah, you know, Granddaddy used to work there, and he did that, you know." And this is, and he has all the details on how they, you know, how they used to do the slaughter, and it just, you know, as you kind of move through the movie, um, it gets just tighter and tighter, and there's really no separation between animal and human. I mean, you know, the two of the youths end up getting a sledge to the head. That's how they die, and it's obvious that that's, you know, of course they're a cannibal family. That's how they see these people, but it early on it sets that tone, and it just becomes inevitable that they're all going to be, you know, slaughtered just like cattle, and the manner is going to be the same. I mean, it sets that from the jump.
yeah, it definitely feels like they're kind of coming down the chute, getting ready for their final moments. And one thing I love about this movie is, I mean, it was shot in sort of the Round Rock area, kind of around there. Like now, all of that is like developed now, but it and like the gas stations in Bastrop, so it was all shot in Central Texas. I live in Central Texas. You live in Central Texas. We know about the way that summers are here and
Yeah.
how just oppressive. And I mean, it's June as we're recording this. It's already like awful outside, and we have not even gotten to July and August. You talked about the way that it is structured in this kind of the way that it's designed in this like almost docudrama feel, where it really feels like they just grabbed a camera and followed a bunch of maniacs around. And one thing I love reflecting on is I've done quite a bit of research about the making of this movie, and it sort of was that they were just like grabbing a camera and following maniacs around. Not that they cast like dangerous people or anything to play these characters, but they were in that old house with no air conditioning, with a bunch of old meat and bones laying around, and it really was like they were going crazy together while making this movie. And it's not something that I think film production crews now should strive for, because it's probably not the safest way
Right.
to make a movie, but there is something about it that you cannot fake. There's something so primal about the way that these people are reacting. And it's not even just the like the everyone talks about the dinner table scene at the end, which is extremely intense. But I was struck by there's a moment uh after night has fallen and Sally and Franklin are the only two people at the van, and they don't know yet that all three of their friends are dead, but they like Sally wants to go look for Jerry, her boyfriend, the only guy in that group that's demonstrably not from Texas. He has this
Yeah.
very sort of Midwest accent situation going on. And she wants to go look for him, and Franklin is like, you shouldn't go out there by yourself, like it's a bad idea. And she said, well, you can't come with me because I'm going down the hill and you can't make it down the hill. And they start fighting over a flashlight,
Hmm.
and it's just a brother and a sister arguing and saying, let me have the flashlight, no, I have to keep it, let me have it, no, no, no. And but there is something so intensely real about the way that they are fighting. And some of that is because like apparently Paul Partain, who played Franklin, sort of went a little method in preparing for the role, and was kind of annoying to the rest of the cast because he thought that's what he needed to be. But
Hmm.
I can just feel myself like arguing with my dad over a tool in the middle of July in Texas, because that's what the heat does to you. It's just so it's so primal and so so intense. And I we keep saying that word, but it really, you mentioned being more affected by this as you get older, and I think that's happening to me too. This is maybe the like 10th time in my life I've seen this movie, and
Hmm.
it hit me even harder. Um, why do you think it affects you more as you get older?
I don't know. I think I just I think, we see it more in more than just a um, slasher type horror movie. Like I said, I think when I first saw it, I was looking for fun, blood, and guts. But when you get older, it's just the inevitability of the horror on this. I mean, there's this whole thing is that cattle chute sort of leading everybody from one end to the other, and I think that once I recognized that about it, it really sort of took it to the next level for me. And then just the uncomfortable details of it. You talked about the production of it. There's nobody in this movie that's not sweating all the time. They are as actors obviously extremely miserable the whole time. And I look at how uncomfortable it must have been to film that dinner scene, in that super hot house, and just I can't imagine, um, you know, the actress who played Sally kind of enduring that whole scene, and it really unsettles me, but in a way that I keep coming back to, and I certainly don't mind, blood and guts and gore, but I'll tell you, I watched Terrifier, and I get it, but I have no need to watch Terrifier 2 and 3. It's not for me, right? But this movie, even without showing as much, is just much more unsettling overall than almost any horror movie I've ever seen. Like I feel like maybe it's also that outgrowth of believing it when I was a kid, that I can still watch this and kind of go, yeah, this could happen. This is like, and part of me still has, like I said, has that little spark that goes, maybe this did happen somewhere around here, even though when I'm awake, I know that's not true, but in my daydreams, it maybe still is.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, it is dark in a way that no other movie that's comparable to it in form is dark. Like, and there are arguments over whether or not it's really a slasher because of the modus operandi and the way that things work. I call it a slasher just because like it's about a maniac with a mask that kills people. I'm kind of grouping it in. But like you, I watched uh Friday the 13th and Halloween and stuff like that before I saw this. And those movies have an element of fun to them that just is not there for Texas
Yeah,
Chainsaw. Like the closest thing to it is when what is her Pam when Kirk and Pam say we're going to go down to the swimming hole and have a swim, and you sort of think for a minute. I love that it sort of plays, and this wasn't necessarily deliberate because slashers hadn't really been codified as a subgenre by 1974, but I love that your slasher fan brain goes, oh, this is where we'll get our like requisite nudity
yeah.
in this slasher movie. No, you're not gonna get it. You're not gonna get any of the like there's occasional moments of sort of humor that's really more built around like the characters being sort of ticked off at each other because of their situation. um but it is not playing by any of those rules. It is just, and I read today, somehow I'd never read this before, that the reason that it has the kind of true story thing at the beginning of the film is Toby Hooper, at least partially, like they wanted to play with the idea that the government is lying to you and
Yeah.
the world is lying to you, and the whole this was Watergate era. So we're talking about a population that has become to distrust figures of authority in really visceral ways. So you have a movie about a movie that lies to you in the opening moments, and then you have the radio announcer is clearly lying, and the man at the gas station is clearly lying, and everything about your fate is already sealed because the people with any position of authority or power to stop what's about to happen to you are not going to do it because they do not care about you. It is such a like nothing about that is present in like Friday the 13th or Halloween. Like it's just not the same vibe. It's just so gnarly. And I do think that the older I get, the more I sort of realize like, oh yeah, I'm gonna die one day.
Hmm.
It just hits you on a completely different level. Um, which isn't to say that it's not like entertaining to watch. It absolutely is. We're making it sound like this sort of
Oh,
slog through.
it's a I thoroughly enjoy this movie. Like there,
Yeah.
I'm not like enduring this movie, even though, we talk about how much it makes you uncomfortable. I love this movie with all my heart. And even though there isn't a lot of humor, there's some things that are kind of dark humor. Like um I love when Leatherface goes into like put upon mode, like where he's they show up with Sally, and he's kind of has this attitude of, oh gosh, well, I didn't know we were going to have guests, but let me see what I can do. I'll try and throw some dinner on. And he's really kind of fretting about the house while all this stuff is going on, and it's just absolutely insane what's happening in there. But he's just his mannerisms are kind of hilarious to me in that one. And the cook who it never really states, but I guess he is their older brother. He kind of has a father vibe, but I think it's established later that he's their brother, but he's trying to whip them all into shape, and he doesn't uh well, he doesn't really want to he doesn't want to do the dirty work. He doesn't like to kill people, but I get you got to do that. So but you need to behave while you're doing it, and be sure and clean up the house. And it's just this whole bizarre family life that we look into in that little 10 minutes there.
Yeah, it's so wonderfully strange. And I speaking of that, like the whole dinner scene with Grandpa, which is probably the most famous scene in the movie at this point, other than maybe the final shot. But I did a piece for Mental Floss like years ago where I was writing about the making of this movie, and I did a bunch of research. And according to Hooper, apparently what happened was the actor they had hired to play Grandpa showed up, and they had to put him under all that like corpse like makeup to make him look like Grandpa. And they put him under all the makeup, and it took a really long time, and it was very hot, and he got claustrophobic and said, I'm never putting this makeup on again. So whatever you need me to do, you better get it done now because I'm not doing it again. And they didn't have the money to like go find another actor, do the makeup all over again, block out more shooting days. So they literally just like marathoned all night,
Ugh.
all the dinner party stuff. To the point that I also read somewhere that like because it again it smelled, the house was full of
Yeah.
bones and feathers and meat that was spoiling in the heat, and people would like lean out of windows and barf in the middle of like between takes because it was just so unbelievably oppressive to do all of that, but they had to get it done. And it just is so like it's remarkable that anything even cohesive came out of that. But what you get in the end is like, oh, it people really were going crazy. That's why it's so intense. But I want to ask you before we wrap up, because as I said at the beginning, this launched a franchise, a very slow starting franchise, because the first sequel doesn't show up until like 12 years
Mhm.
after it's 86, I believe, is Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. Do you have any fondness for the sequels? Do you go to those at all?
So I like two and three. I think they're a lot of fun and I enjoy them. The original stands alone in my mind, like it
Yeah.
sort of exists as its own thing. But I like two and three. Varying results with with some of the other remakes and sidetracks and the many over the years. I actively did not like the Netflix one that came out here not too long ago. It's been a while since I saw it, but I just remember kind of watching it and thinking, yeah, that's not exactly what I was hoping for. But I can't honestly tell you why I didn't like it. I just kind of blacked it out. I remember not liking it.
I, as someone who has watched like the small Texas town that he's from get like the artisanal coffee shops and stuff
Yeah,
like that, I did find it funny. It doesn't really work as a Texas Chainsaw movie for
I
me, but
think
like
that's it. Yeah,
I had fun with it, but I also I did not like what they did with Sally Hardesty in that movie. It really felt like someone wrote a script about like hipsters taking over a small Texas town and Leatherface being mad about that. And then someone said, "But we got to have the original Final Girl because Halloween did that and it made so much money."
hmm
So they sort of shoehorn Sally in and don't give her a great role in it. So that kind of bugged me. But Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2 in particular is a fascinating and crazy movie.
and flat out
Um,
hilarious.
it's hilarious. It's so like weird, and what's amazing about it is Toby Hooper directed it. And when I first saw it, which was years after I saw the first one, which like you said, it's its own thing. It is that is there will never be another movie like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That is lightning in a bottle of a very particular kind that I don't think anybody's gonna ever capture again. But part two is wild because when I finally saw part two, I I I wrote something about it, and I was basically like, Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part Two is what everyone warned me that Texas Chainsaw Massacre was going to be. It is 2 hours of a maniac with a chainsaw chasing people and playing with body parts and eating human chili and
Exactly.
hanging out in an abandoned amusement park. Like it is insane in a way that Texas Chainsaw Part 1 is just absolutely not. It's much more it's that movie is so much more cerebral and and claustrophobic, whereas part two is just like a carnival ride. It's just so out there and weird and uh such an 80s movie. It's so good that like he made sort of the ultimate 70s horror movie with the first one and then made like the ultimate 80s horror movie with the second one.
And they're both fantastic in their own ways,
Yeah.
it's but that I think that distinction there is why the original affects me so much is it's two is super fun and it's so batshit crazy this is not going to happen, but one you could be like, yeah, I go through like weird little rural places and who knows, this could happen at some point. It sort of has that realism that nothing else does.
Yeah, it's and I mean if you live in Texas, like it takes place The movie starts on the eve of the Red River rivalry. The first victims are driving up to see the game at the Cotton Bowl, which is such a relatable Texas thing to think about. So this is the part of the interview where I try to bring it back to the guest and the imagination of the guest. Um, you definitely I don't want to make too fine of a connection here necessarily. It's up to you, but like it is interesting to me that we're talking about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and you're about to release a book that's about uh, a reanimated Texan corpse. I'm wondering what the impact to your creative part of your brain was from this movie. Like, what do you think sticks with you that you bring to your own writing?
I think it's like the horror for me. I don't know that that this is. I don't know if I can draw a straight line to Texas Chainsaw Massacre to the Unkillable Frank Lightning, but it's definitely what opened me up to, hey, I need to see what this Friday the 13th thing is about. I need to see what all these other movies are about. Um, oh, look, this creepy Stephen King cover, discovering writers like that. And I think it just started my uh, love of horror that's been with me my whole life and kind of led me to a lot of these other things. When I travel uh, from Stephen King, I eventually make it to J.R. Lansdale, who's one of my biggest influences, and I would say he certainly has an influence on the Unkillable Frank Lightning and a lot of my other stuff. But um, just I think the fact that I usually set my stuff in Texas, and the whether it's in Austin or whether it's a small town, being from Texas influences all of that, and the fact that the first horror thing that I can remember in my life is a movie set in Texas, just kind of cements that for me.
Our guest has been Josh Rountree. Josh, we know the Unkillable Frank Lightning is out July 15th from Tachyon. Everyone should go pre-order it. It's fantastic. Before we let you go, will you let people know where they can find you online and what events you might have coming up for Frank Lightning?
Yeah, my website is joshrountree.com. There is no D in Rountree, so it's Rountree. I've got a kickoff event at Ghoulish Books in San Antonio on July 15th. And I have other things lining up. There'll be an event in Santa Fe and one in Dallas, and looking to put some more things on the calendar for that.
Awesome. Josh Rountree, it was so great talking to you. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks so much. Let's do it again.
Thanks once again to Josh Rountree for being on the show. The Unkillable Frank Lightning is out July 15th from Tachyon. I highly recommend it. It is a blast of a book. I also highly recommend just watching the Texas Chainsaw Massacre if you somehow haven't still haven't seen that film, or if you haven't seen it in a long time. It is one of the most shockingly effective horror movies ever made. Like, it gets me every time. It gets under my skin in that way that only it can. It's an absolute masterpiece. And yeah, go find Josh online, go to his website, check him out on social media, and make sure you support him as he promotes this book, because it's a fantastic book and I hope that a lot of y'all read it. And if you want to keep track of everything we have going on, the best way to do that is to follow us on Blue Sky. We are at scareshapedus.bsky.social over there. That is where you will find new episodes, of course, but also new guest announcements and giveaways. We sometimes do book giveaways over on the Blue Sky page, and it's always a lot of fun. So head over there, give us a follow. We're also over on Facebook. We're the Scares That Shaped Us over there if you want to like that page. And we also post new episodes on Facebook. We are also on YouTube. We're the Scares That Shaped Us on YouTube. If that's how you prefer to listen to your podcast, head over there, smash those like and subscribe buttons. We appreciate it. You can also email me, scares that shaped us podcast at gmail.com. If you have a question, a topic you'd like to hear me talk about on the air, an author you'd like to hear me talk to, always happy to hear from everybody. And if you like the show, please tell your friends. Let everyone know about the cool stuff we're doing over here. Leave us a 5-star review on the podcasting app of your choice, which will help boost our profile on those apps and hopefully bring in more listeners so we can keep doing all this cool stuff. We will be back next week, June 18th, with a brand new episode. I'm not quite ready to announce the guest yet, but if you're following us on Blue Sky, you will know who that guest is as soon as I am able to announce them. That's it for us this week. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. I'm Matthew Jackson, and this is The Scares That Shaped Us.